Welcome to Cultural Products. I'm excited to present this particular lesson because we're deviating from the typical set of slides where I have a bunch of information and then some bullet points and highlighted words. I'm actually going to give you a more like a visual essay. So it'll be like one image per slide and it'll be a lot of artwork. And it's not necessarily a museum. I would call it maybe like a digital portfolio. So anyway, let's get into some cultural products. If I had to choose one cultural product to be in my personal museum, it would be the visual music experience called Black is King by Beyonce. We've only made it a few lectures in, and now I'm bringing up my queen. I'm actually going to relate this to our course textbook because Richard Delgado, the editor of our textbook, in his chapter on page 230, talked about storytelling and counter storytelling as new windows to reality. So when I ask myself, how do we view ourselves and our culture when the dominant culture says we're insignificant? I answer that by telling myself the lyrics to Black is King. And if you're saying, wow, Dr. Griffin, that's cool, but like I'm not Black, so I don't know if that really applies to me. Let me explain. Every identity has some sort of stereotype. There's not one identity that I can think of that someone hasn't created a negative stereotype for. The dumb jock, the nerd. I could go on. So regardless of what cultures you're representing, there's always someone somewhere who's going to say something negative and tell you that there's a part of you that's insignificant. And not if that happens, but when that happens, I want you to know that if you feel insignificant, Beyonce says, you better think again. And no, I'm not going to sing it to you, but she says, better wake up because you're part of something bigger. Not just a speck in the universe, not just some words in a Bible verse. You are the living word. Bigger than you, bigger than we. I like that because when I think of culture, I think of we. Bigger than the picture they framed us to see. You know what? Thank you, Beyonce, for bringing in critical race theory into your lyrics. I love that so much. Bigger than the picture they framed us to see. It's like critical race theory says there's a dominant culture and a dominant race that gives a narrow view of how other people are, and that view helps keep them in power. And so Beyonce says we're bigger than the picture they framed us to see. So using our critical race theory and our lenses that resist ethnocentric bias, we see it now, and it ain't no secret. So let's see. How do we view ourselves and our culture when the dominant culture says we're insignificant? We are going to create new windows to reality. And in our discussion of new windows to reality, we're going to look at what cultural products are and how we study them. So there are an infinite number of cultural products. You could think of a cultural product as something that an archaeologist might find about an ancient civilization. So in 1,000 years and 3,020 something, what will people look back and think about the food that we ate, the art that we created, the literature that we wrote, and the films that we created? Those people would be studying the cultural products of our civilization. So, but we don't have to wait until then. We can actually do that now. And doing that now tells us a lot about the way that we think. Doing it in the future tells us about how we think as well. So here are the specific types of cultural products I will be reviewing. You'll notice that I didn't actually put food down here. I love food, and I felt that if I were to do some food in the lecture, I would wind up going into a black hole and like only talking about food. So because I can talk about food for so long, I'm actually just going to let you think about the foods of your cultures. And maybe one day when I do this lecture in a class, for this lecture, I would have everyone bring a piece of cultural food, and then we'd have like a potluck, and then I would lecture. So keep that in your imagination as we go through. Cultural products can be considered how artists share stories, histories, hopes, and struggles of their communities. I will be showcasing stories and counter stories in this lecture, and we will use our critical race theory understanding that these resources, these stories, histories, hopes, and struggles are considered funds of knowledge. So they don't necessarily have to be written in a history book and taught in a four-walled classroom to be considered a fund of knowledge. And I will showcase stories and counter stories from other cultural products produced by Native American or First Nations people, African American, Asian American, and Latino American communities within the US and across the world. Knowing, this is from our Module 3, previous module, big concept, that critical race theory uses funds of knowledge, uses folk tales and stories, histories, hopes, and struggles to dismantle racism, to dismantle classism. And if we're going to dismantle them, then we've got to talk about it. So with our first piece of artwork, I'll give you something to talk about. Right out the gate, this is the first piece of artwork that I'm showing you. Talk about dismantling racism. This piece of artwork was painted by a white person, and I like to showcase this as an example of when artist and subject are from different cultures. So the white artist titled this painting, Who Gets to Interpret Race and Power? Painted in 2018. Who gets to interpret race and power? Maybe you agree with this painting, or maybe you disagree with it, but the point is it should spark a conversation. It should spark a dialogue. How do products of culture contribute to race and power, to these cycles of biases that we have, this ethnocentric bias that we've been talking about? I wouldn't say anything about if this art is right or wrong, but I am presenting it to you as a product of our culture, as we as humans psychologically understand the interpretation of race and power. Art can also be used as a way to pass down messages throughout the years of who should have political power, who should get to keep power, and who should not get to keep power. In 1890, Edward Poynter painted The Visit of the Queen of Sheba to King Solomon. This is how the Queen of Sheba is depicted. She is smack dab in the center of the painting, and I want you to take a moment to look closely at her. Notice what you observe. And then we'll go back to the title, which is called The Queen of Sheba. I'm going to give you some more information that might change how you view this painting. The Queen of Sheba was from Ethiopia. Ethiopia. Now go back and zoom in on the Queen of Sheba and how she is depicted in this painting. There is a name for what is happening in this painting, and it's called whitewashing. This 1890 painting is an instance of whitewashing. It's a way to pass down messages of who should have political power. So even though the Queen of Sheba, an Ethiopian woman, was a queen, she had power. The artist revised history in order to send a message. So the question I would ask in a cultural psychology lens is, what prompts an artist to make this message? What prompts an artist to make this message? Think about it and get back to me on your mind map for this module. What is whitewashing? This image is called Critical Race Theory. I love it. Painted in 2021. Jonathan Harris is the author of this, or the painter. I guess he's the author too. He's the painter, and in an interview, you can click on the source if you'd like to dive deeper. When someone asked Jonathan Harris, why do you think critical race theory has become such a flashpoint for conservative media and lawmakers? He responded, we live in a sensitive time. People think, if I feel like something makes me uncomfortable, I'm going to speak about it and make it be known. I think conservatives are trying to switch it, like, even though our forefathers or great-grandfathers caused this, it's not us now, and we feel uncomfortable with you bringing this back up. Jonathan Harris says, it's not fair, because unless you're doing some work to make us feel comfortable, nobody's going to feel comfortable. It's just going to be a constant tug of war. So beautiful, a constant tug of war, because you know what? The battlefield is in the mind. And so whitewashing means taking a person, usually it's a person, and making their skin color whiter or lighter, as we can see with this person who's supposed to be the Queen of Sheba, who is unlike any Ethiopian I have certainly ever seen. This is an example of taking a dark, rich, ebony-skinned person and making their skin whiter. Now, Jonathan Harris took that term whitewashing and made it literal and is like painting white over Black history. So he's so creative. Furthermore, in his interview, he says, if critical race theory is about acknowledgement and understanding of the way that systemic racism is structurally integral to our nation's history, look at our nation's history, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, the risk is that to ignore racism's existence is to perpetuate it. To ignore it is to let it keep going. To ignore it is to let the cycle go. And if we want to be cycle breakers, if we want to be part of the solution, that means we can't ignore it. That means that we actually have to name it and discuss it and use our senses, use our eyes, use our mouth, use our sense of touch, and stop ignoring it. Directly, mindfully approach it, hopefully with kindness and compassion. Speaking of perpetuation and perpetuating racism, art can be used as propaganda to influence people's thoughts and behaviors. Hey, that's psychology. It is often said that history is written by the victors. U.S. history is full of accounts honoring the conquerors, while the voice of the conquered remains silent. But how has artistic interpretation and propaganda influenced such events and perhaps altered history in the making? There is a professor at Wake Forest University who says there are some very famous early works that were used as propaganda to shape public opinion of Native Americans. You'll see some that demonize the Native Americans, turn them into monsters, and others that show Indians as Greek statues, heavily muscled and lean. So that's what that professor says. Early American painters often used their creative licenses to make political or social statements, including public opinion, helping to justify concepts like manifest destiny, or even calling to task governmental powers for their treatment of natives. Here are 6 works of fine art that helped shape America's views of First Nations people. This one is called The Death of Wolfe, 1770. The Death of Jane McCrea, 1804. Like I said, this is a more visual essay lecture. Falls of Kaaterskill, 1826. The Rescue, 1837. Here's that strange First Nations Greek body mesh. Hey man, it's art. There's no right or wrong, unless it has a way of influencing people's thoughts and behaviors into negative treatment of people. Then I have to say, okay, now we're getting into right and wrong territory. This painting called The Death Struggle, 1845. I actually had to look at it for quite a while to figure out what I was looking at, what point of view I was supposed to be looking at. And finally, the sixth painting, American Progress, 1872. American Progress. Do you feel American when you look at this photo? American Progress. Okay. That was art. And let's look at how similar this angel is. I'm going to show you a different type of angel from, let's see, like 130, 40, 150 years later. Here's what our angels look like. A Victoria's Secret angel, that's right. Here is Karlie Kloss at the Victoria's Secret fashion show. Girl. What is cultural appropriation? Cultural appropriation can be defined as the borrowing from someone else's culture without their permission and without acknowledgement to the victim culture's past. This picture of Victoria's Secret angel, Karlie Kloss, at the fashion show serves as an example of the hypersexualization of Native American women and the misuse of the headdress. And as I was digging into examples, I found on this source website, this author wrote, although cultural appropriation has negative effects, it does not mean that all Native American culture is off limits. I thought that was pretty cool to share. By definition, cultural appropriation occurs when there is no acknowledgement toward the culture and no regard for taboo items. Author of Henna and Hip Hop. What? I think I need to read that book. It's called Henna and Hip Hop, The Politics of Cultural Production and the Work of Cultural Studies. Oh, yeah. That author adds that in order to reproduce trends from another culture, one must work with that culture. If not, one runs the risk of denying the harsh history that many minorities have endured, a history of which one may not even be aware. Okay. Who should wear a headdress, speaking of fashion? Only those who were known as being admired and greatly respected from other members of the tribe would wear a headdress. It was a symbol that represented bravery and honor. The people who wore it were distinguished members, such as the chief, a warrior, or a person being honored for something. It was once common for a headdress to be worn during battle, as well as among the First Nations people of Canada and the United States. Currently, you would most likely see a headdress as worn during a traditional First Nations wedding ceremony or another ceremony such as a powwow. There are many types of headdresses that have different styles and meanings, but one similarity among them all is that they had to be earned to be worn. I did not know that. I was ignorant of that, and I'm a part of the First Nations Comanche tribe. And so much history that I don't know. Thank you so much for taking this class, because now I can teach it, and now I can learn it as well. So, the one similarity among headdresses is that they had to be earned to be worn. Both men and women can wear a headdress. The only difference would be that some men wore the bonnet style and some women would wear a beaded headband style. Now that we know who should wear a headdress, who shouldn't. That basically means that everyone else who shouldn't, who hasn't earned it, or who hasn't earned the right, shouldn't wear a headdress. I will not show an image of the people who wear headdresses at Coachella, the famous music festival. But I know that you have probably heard of that. So I will move on to another culture. Is it cultural appropriation or is it cultural collaboration? This is a, 1994. Oh, I should have put the year down there, but I'm looking at this newspaper clipping. 1994 cover featuring a look, like a fashion look, from Jean Paul's Trans-Siberian collection. Ooh, Trans-Siberian collection. Fashion should follow the food industry, one fashion designer writes. Fashion should follow the food industry in its respect for the ingredients, the origin, and the producers. She says, I think one of the biggest problems of the fashion world is the disconnect of fashion with textiles, specifically with heritage textiles. It is equivalent to being a chef who is not in sync with the ingredients of a recipe. This provides a type of cut and paste creativity with disregard for the origin. I really like that. This artist who I'm referring to, I hope I don't butcher her name, Echevarria, whose brand Noir Handmade, she makes mud silks from Southeast Asia. She argues that cultural collaboration should be at the root of fashion, including its raw materials, rather than cultural appropriation. Let's look at some examples from the runway. You tell me. Is Valentino's 2016 spring campaign cultural appropriation or cultural collaboration? I don't have a right or wrong answer. I only want you to think about things that you have not been exposed to before. I will refrain from giving my personal opinions. See me in office hours. But do notice how the culture is taking like a back seat, and the person who is clearly not a part of the Kenyan culture is given the importance. I could write a whole paper on this. Okay, let's look at the Sikh turban at Gucci's Fall 2018 show. Milan Fashion Week, cultural appropriation or cultural collaboration? Examples from the runway. Okay, that was fashion. And now we'll look at how media of cultural products spreads religion. I chose Jesus because there are so many different versions of Jesus available. He was a great character to focus on. So I ask again, who gets to interpret race and power? That was the question of the first artwork that I showed you. So now we're looking at media. Media as a cultural product can spread religion, and it can spread messages of who gets to interpret race and power. So check out this 12th century top left image of Jesus. Wow. How different is that from the one that's right next to it? So we've got some Venice, we got some Italian Jesus, we've got some French Jesus, Macedonian, that's Greek Jesus. We definitely got Black Jesus. We've got sandy, looks like there's like sand on his face. King of Kings, MGM, sandy, dusty, desert, white American Jesus. Kind of looks like a rugged cowboy. What else about Jesus? Oh, yes. Let's see, 12 images of Jesus. I love this collage. I'm so grateful to the person on the internet who put this collage together for me and for you. let's look at how different top left Jesus is than bottom right Jesus is. Have you seen any of these images of Jesus before? Because I think I've only seen like the bottom right, maybe the top two right. I have never seen this this Asian cultural representation of Jesus. That was really cool for me. Speaking of Asian cultural representations of Jesus, I can't help but think of Buddy Jesus from the movie Dogma in 1999. Jesus in different popular film media. I saw Dogma probably like 15 years ago, and I don't remember much from that movie, but I remember Buddy Jesus, or Buddy Christ. Like, what a concept. And then, of course, recreated as Korean Jesus in 22 Jump Street, 2014, when Jonas is praying to Korean Jesus and Ice Cube shuts him down. I won't read it because it's not safe for work, but please enjoy how Jesus has been integrated into our popular culture. Anything Ice Cube says is worth repeating. Okay, technology. If I tell you a culture uses this type of technology, what could you tell me about the culture? This is an early printing press, and I'd like to ask you a question that I don't know if you've been asked before. Is technology neutral? Is technology neutral? Is technology only used as a means to an end? As a problem solver, regardless of the cost to the environment, the culture, or to the human beings themselves? Technology can be the artifact of a culture that contains the values of a culture. If you show me a printing press, I would say, oh, that culture values knowledge, right? They're printing books, so it values maybe education. If I tell you a culture uses this technology, what could you tell me about this culture? Is technology really neutral? Or does it mold society to fit the needs of the technology rather than the other way around? Maybe technology operates to control society and its members rather than as a tool to help society. A similar example of this is the current state of fast food, which sees eating as only a technical act, while ignoring the social and cultural dynamics involved in the process. By treating the act of eating as a means of ingesting food rapidly, the use of fast food has abandoned the cultural and family impact setting at the table, which has had an impact on the development of family and family dynamics, family relationships. What is that? Was that like a fish fillet? Speaking of technology, let's take a feminist perspective of technology. Gender stereotypes do drive women to quit in the STEM field. And you're like, what does STEM have to do with anything? Well, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEM. So now we're starting to bring in some feminist perspectives. You see here, this man on the left, his mind is preoccupied with science and technology, STEM, and the woman on the right is preoccupied not with solving problems and figuring out the cure for cancer, but with how she might be stereotypically perceived or negatively perceived by the man in the job environment. There has been so much research that has been showing women are leaving the STEM field, women who are interested in science, little girls who are in science class in kindergarten and 6th grade who say, I'm going to grow up and become a scientist. Well, when those little girls grow up and they get to college and they are faced with pressures from men, gender stereotypes and biases, and hostile studying environments, hostile work environments, And they don't get paid as much because there's a pay gap in between what women make and what men make in this country, even as doctors. Then women leave the field because who would want to stay in that environment? So there are feminist perspectives of technology and culture. We're talking about psychology. You can't see a perspective, so it's psychology. It's like you know it's there, but you can't see it. There are Afrocentric perspectives of technology, such as skin bleaching to look and act more like whites. The Afrocentric perspective has not been found to be clearly delineated in our scientific literature, but it appears to view technology as a means to modify the appearance and performance of Black Americans so they look and act more like whites. By the way, this is the same person. And let's talk about it. It's happening in all cultures, not all cultures, it's happening in more than one culture. If I tell you a culture uses brightening and lightening technology, what could you tell me about that culture? Western beauty brands play to Asian desires for whiter skin, and the euphemisms they use to avoid appearing racist are brightening and lightening when selling their beauty brands to Asian markets. There are also patterns that cultures imprint in the land itself. Moving on from the landscape of our face to the landscape in our agriculture. We have agricultural systems on the top, transportation networks on the left, and residential and commercial buildings on the right. This is what I mean when I'm referring to landscape. The lived cultural landscape of settler societies are a complex reflection of the people-to-people and the people-to-place relationships that structure our everyday lives. Cultural landscape studies was developed in the 1940s and focused on the evolution of places and includes the combination of natural and man-made elements that comprise at any given time the essential character of a place. Let's see. Cultural landscape studies emphasize the connection of natural environments and built environments. See image on the bottom right. Yet cultural landscape methods for studying places and people's shaping of them tended to stress the physical and not the political dimensions of the place. So now we're looking at how the way that the land is scaped, either naturally or man-made, has a lot to do with the politics of the region as well. Cultural landscape also refers to an approach to studying those forms, an approach that uses interpretive strategies for understanding cultural meanings embedded in landscapes. Wow, I never thought that this patch of grass could be connected to cultural psychology. But oh, it is. I'll give you some cultural psychology when I'm sitting on the 405 going nowhere fast. I've got some psychology for you. And cultural landscapes influence technology. Check out this virtual farm game. So we're moving backwards now from landscape back to technology. Landscape influences technology, technology influences landscape. So we've got some technology influencing the farms on the top image, and then technology influencing a virtual farm. What was that game called? I don't know. I obviously never played it, but I'm sure at least two of you have. On to aesthetics, bringing it back, tying it all together. We can use technology to make people of color aesthetically pleasing to corporate clients, such as skin whitening in different cultures. Aesthetics means physical appearance and usually physical beauty. So if something is aesthetically pleasing, it is pleasing to my senses. And now we're starting to bring up issues of, okay, well, who is it we're pleasing? Are we pleasing everybody? Are we pleasing the people who make money? Are we pleasing the people who make rules and laws? Okay, I'm talking about food. I told you I couldn't help myself. Food and aesthetics. I found this image of two different tacos. One is a more visually aesthetic version of a taco. If I'm a commercial maker and I want to make money, I don't care about making people feel accepted in a culture. I care about making money. I might choose to change the image of an authentic cultural taco and make it more aesthetically pleasing for the purpose of making money, for the purpose of commercialism in a commercial, in an advertisement. So using our critical race theory lens, we start to see, oh, if it's not pretty enough to market it and sell it, people will just change it and still call it authentic. Because people in commercials are lying. Onto literature. The BBC Culture asked writers around the globe to pick stories that have endured across generations and continents, and to really pick stories that have changed society. So this is from the 100 stories that shaped the world. If I were you, I would click this BBC link and see what the 100 are, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. See what the other 90 are. You have 10 here. This is only a starting point, these top 10, and even the 100. It aims to spark a conversation about why some stories endure, how stories continue to resonate centuries and millennia after they were created. There's something about these stories that has interested the psychology of humans for centuries and millennia, and they endure, and we got to read them today. Why sharing stories is a fundamental human impulse. This cultural product is one that can overcome division, inspire change, and even spark revolutions. Ooh, I'm here to overcome division. I'm here to spark change. I might even be here to spark a revolution. A cultural revolution! Whoever controls the literature knows that that is a good way to control the narrative of a people. I want you to identify what your story is. Who controls your narrative? Mic drop. Who controls your narrative? Okay. I'm so proud of myself. I only limited all of literature down to 2 slides. The next topic is views of space. How does a flexible space in the educational classroom influence our thinking of learning versus when we are in a contained space? So check out this aerial view of how a flexible classroom would be put together. Where would you choose to sit? You can sit on the floor, on a desk. You can sit in a circle. You can sit in a row. You can sit in a small group facing each other. There's a group of 2, 3, and 4 students. There's a group of students facing each other. And then the teacher is not in the center. The teacher's actually off to the side. And there are multiple chairs in front of the teacher's desks, letting me know that little small conferences are available. And all of these have the ability to move. So it looks like most of these chairs and desks have wheels, so they're flexible versus the contained classroom where it's the teacher's desk in the front and row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, and you better not move. And if you have to go to the bathroom, you better wait your turn and ask. So if I were to walk into this classroom, I would feel so different about learning than if I were to walk into the traditional classroom. And I haven't even learned anything yet, but I feel different about learning because of my view of the space. And let's talk about the space that you can't really see, and that is the personal space. What does personal space mean to you? And who taught you that? Because I'm willing to bet that your views of space came from your culture. The concept of physical boundary and territory is what we can define as cultural space. Space is something that varies greatly from culture to culture. Have you ever met someone who felt really comfortable talking to you right here, and they didn't mean to be rude, and they didn't think it was weird at all? But you're like, dude, you are so close to me. Yeah, those people like to stand behind me at the supermarket. Like, you're so close to me, but I know it's because we're from different cultures. So step back, please, and then step back a little more. Okay, now we're at the appropriate American distance. 2 grocery carts lengths. Depending on where you live, the amount of space or distance that is acceptable in social situations can be very different. The space and boundaries that encompass our being is a concept that is learned very early on and practiced without a level of conscious awareness. We don't really talk about what is an acceptable or proper amount of space to give someone. We just know. Unless, of course, you get too close. That's when someone usually lets you know, like, hey, you need to give me more space. Or if you're my dog, I'm like, hey, there's too much space in between us. You need to get closer. My dog, she'll come sit in the social space, and then like a few minutes later, she creeps closer, gets to the personal space, and then I grab her and I'm like, no, you need to be in the intimate space. We need to be touching, and that's how far away we need to be at all times. Unless, of course, I'm recording a lecture, then get out there in the public space. Space invaders. I like this little bar chart of the appropriate distance for a person in your space based off of culture from, of course, the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology. So check out the US. For close relationships, that's about 1.5 feet. Anything farther than that, pardon me, it would be like a personal acquaintance. And then strangers in America should stand 2.5 feet apart. Strangers in Romania need to stand over 3 feet apart. And let's see, the closest distance between me and a stranger would be if I was from Argentina, and then we would be standing, 2 feet apart. Whew. I don't know. That's already too close. Just thinking about it. This is why you need to travel. Because what's appropriate in one culture is completely different and appropriate in a different way in another culture. This is a great way. If I had unlimited resources, I would pay for each of you to fly to a different country for like a month, and you'd have to write a whole paper on space invaders and appropriate distance in how close strangers stood to you. Finally, my favorite. When I was in undergrad, my major was cinema, television, critical studies. So I have only put together 5 slides of cinema. And this was very hard for me because I wanted to put together 500 slides of cinema. So we're going to boil all of that down, Dr. Griffin, and we're going to be succinct. So let's revisit Queens of Africa. Remember that art is a way to pass down messages of who should have political power. We saw the 1890 version of the Queen of Sheba. I think it was the Queen of Sheba, yeah. This is the 1952 version. And as you can see, she's a little less Ethiopian than she was before. I don't know if you could get less Ethiopian, but they certainly whitewashed this Queen of Sheba. I think she's played by an Italian actress, and then later on by Barbra Streisand. Not from Ethiopia. I'll tell you that right now. The crows in Dumbo. Remember Dumbo, the 1941 movie, an animated Disney classic? Always brings back childhood fantasies, teaching us about acceptance, valuable lessons about overcoming obstacles, and using what life gave you to make the most out of it. Remember that. How can that be racist? Why, Dr. Griffin, do you have to ruin my childhood? Well, I'll tell you why. Because sometimes the artist, in this case the voice actor, and the subject are from different cultures. So about these crows, the film Dumbo, 1941, dives deep into cultural appropriation during the pivotal scenes in which the black crows help save the day for the flying elephant, Dumbo. A person wrote for The Insider in 2020, "Today, many believe the crows to be racist caricatures of Black Americans for their use of jive talk." The lead crow is named, you guessed it, Jim Crow. The name of the crow of the 1941 film. His name is Jim Crow. An obvious reference to the racist Southern segregation laws that lasted until the mid-1960s. What makes this troubling is that the character Jim Crow was voiced by a white actor, Cliff Edwards. Cinema as cultural products. Let's get into other cultural appropriations. There's so much wrong with the character of Mr. Yunioshi in the 1961 movie classic Breakfast at Tiffany's. He's not just the epitome of what passed for the official Asian stereotype back then, but he's presented as a cartoon buffoon and spends his screen time in the film flailing on the periphery like some creepy and exotic alien. Even worse, the author of this piece writes, he was played by Mickey Rooney, a white actor wearing yellow face and prosthetic teeth, contorting his features to appear more Japanese? ? He was the kind of Japanese that only existed in Hollywood's imagination, not in reality. So now we see cinema as a cultural product that exists in the power maker's imagination, not reality. And Hollywood is a huge cycle of people who get in power and stay power. Second to last, let's talk about these braids. Let us do it. These days, reality TV stars Kim Kardashian and Kylie Jenner field criticism for posting social media pictures of themselves wearing cornrows, a braided hairstyle that originated with Black women. It's familiar outrage that began with the movie Tin, Bo Derek's 1979 breakout film, in which she introduced the hairstyle to mainstream white audiences. It became a sensation that the white media dubbed Bo Derek braids, despite the fact that Black women had been wearing them for years. The Bo Derek hair craze set an ongoing double standard. Check this out. The hairstyle that continues to cost Black women respect and jobs becomes stylish and cool when worn by trending non-Black women. That's right, I called the Kardashians non-Black women. I'm going to call this woman non-Black too. A history professor, Keisha Brown at Tennessee State University, told Huffington Post in 2019, a related issue at hand is the separation of Black culture from the people in history that created it. People embrace the hip or popular elements of Black culture, but not Black Americans. What did my mom say? Everyone want to be Black till the cops come. There's also a couple of songs that address that, and I am not at liberty to say the lyrics in those songs, but I'm thinking them. I'm humming them. I might listen to them after this. And finally, bringing it back with Star Wars, The Force Awakens, narratives that Hollywood controls. Remember I told you Hollywood was the made up of people who perpetuate who gets to stay in power and what that looks like. Yeah, Hollywood's really good at telling us what we should look like. And so I found this meme that someone else put together that says, for years, Hollywood told us that female and minority leads in movies don't sell. So that's why they didn't use them. That's why they cast white people in Asian roles. Or white people in Ethiopian roles. And then the next section of the meme says, highest grossing film of all time. Oh, look, a woman and a minority lead. You can't argue facts. You just can't. To review, cultural products are funds of knowledge. They help us tell stories. Cultural products shape our society. And as we learned from technology, they are shaped by society. Up next is development and socialization. Bye now.